Marcus wiped the grease from his hands and looked at the broken-down Mercedes blocking the rain-soaked road. He had exactly $17 in his wallet, a daughter waiting for dinner at home, and a tow truck he couldn't afford to call. But when the elderly woman stepped out of that car, trembling and afraid, he made a choice that would change everything. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. This is the story of one man who gave everything when he had nothing left to give. The autumn rain hammered against the windshield of Marcus Chen's 15-year-old pickup truck as he drove home from his second job. His body ached from 12 straight hours of work, first at the construction site where he laid bricks under the scorching sun, then at the auto repair shop where he stayed late finishing an engine rebuild. The clock on his dashboard read 8:47, and guilt gnawed at his chest. Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, had been with Mrs. Patterson next door since 3 o'clock. Again, Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, his calloused hands telling the story of a man who worked himself to the bone. 2 years ago, his wife Sarah had died suddenly from an aneurysm, leaving him alone with a mortgage, medical bills that seemed to multiply overnight, and a little girl who still cried for her mama in the middle of the night. He'd taken on every extra shift he could find, sold everything that wasn't essential, and learned to stretch a dollar until it screamed. But it was never quite enough. As he rounded the corner onto Maple Street, his headlights caught something unusual. A sleek black Mercedes sat sideways across the narrow road, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the downpour. Marcus slowed his truck, squinting through the rain. He could make out a figure standing beside the car, an older woman in an elegant coat that was now soaked through. She was trying to wave down passing cars, but vehicle after vehicle swerved around her and disappeared into the night. Marcus knew he should keep driving. He was already late. Emma needed dinner. There were bills spread across his kitchen table that he'd been staring at for 3 days, trying to figure out which ones he could delay paying. He had $17 in his wallet until Friday's paycheck. $17 in 3 days to feed his daughter and himself. But his father's voice echoed in his memory, words spoken long ago when Marcus was just a boy. Son, character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when nobody would ever know the difference. His father had been a mechanic too, the kind of man who'd fix a widow's car for free and never mention it to anyone. Marcus pulled over. The woman's face flooded with relief as he approached, his worn jacket already soaking through. Up close, he could see she was probably in her 70s, with silver hair plastered to her face and eyes that held both fear and dignity. Her hands shook as she clutched her phone. "Thank you for stopping," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "My car just died. The engine made a terrible noise, and now it won't start. I've been calling for a tow truck, but they say it'll be 3 hours." She glanced nervously at the dark street. "I don't feel safe waiting alone." Marcus nodded, water dripping from his hair. "Let me take a look, ma'am. I'm a mechanic." Relief washed over her features. "Oh, thank God, but I should tell you, I can pay for your time. I have my purse." "Let's see if it's something simple first," Marcus said, already moving toward the hood. "Pop the release for me." For the next 45 minutes, Marcus worked in the pouring rain. He grabbed his toolbox from his truck, ignoring the voice in his head that reminded him he was wearing his only good work jacket. The problem revealed itself quickly. A broken serpentine belt had caused the alternator to fail, and the battery had drained. The belt itself was shredded, wrapped around the engine components like rubber spaghetti. It was fixable, but it would require a new belt and some careful work. Marcus glanced at his watch. 9:30. Emma would be worried. Mrs. Patterson would be annoyed. But this woman couldn't stay here in the dark and rain, and 3 hours was too long to wait for help on a deserted street. "I have a belt that'll fit in my truck," he found himself saying. "Let me get you running." "Young man, I insist on paying you," the woman said firmly. "This is above and beyond." Marcus shook his head, already heading to his truck to search through his spare parts bin. "It's okay, ma'am. I've got the part. Just let me help." The repair took another 30 minutes. His fingers were numb from the cold, and his clothes were completely drenched, but finally the engine roared to life. The woman's face lit up with such genuine joy that Marcus couldn't help but smile despite his exhaustion. She insisted on taking his phone number, pressing a business card into his hand that he could barely see in the dark. "Please," she said, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Take this at least, for the part." She tried to hand him a $100 bill. Marcus gently pushed her hand back. "The belt cost me $8 wholesale, ma'am. I'm just glad you're safe. Drive carefully, okay? The roads are slick." "What's your name?" she asked, tears mixing with rain on her weathered cheeks. "Marcus Chen, ma'am." "Marcus," she repeated, as if committing it to memory. "I'm Eleanor Hartwick. You've restored my faith in humanity tonight." She drove away slowly, her tail lights disappearing into the rain, and Marcus stood there for a moment, letting the cold water wash over him. He was soaked to the bone, completely exhausted, and he'd just used a part he might need for a paying customer. As he climbed back into his truck, he caught sight of himself in the rearview mirror. A tired man with grease-stained skin and dark circles under his eyes. Someone who looked far older than his 34 years. When he finally arrived home at 10:15, Mrs. Patterson opened her door before he could even knock, her expression a mixture of irritation and concern. "Marcus, Emma was so worried. She's been asking for you every 10 minutes. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Patterson. There was an emergency. I'll pay you extra for the late hours." The older woman's face softened slightly. "Don't be silly. Just go see your daughter. She's been such a good girl, but she needs her daddy." Emma was curled up on Mrs. Patterson's couch, clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother had made for her 3rd birthday. When she saw Marcus, her face crumpled and she ran to him, not caring that he was dripping wet. "Daddy, I thought something bad happened." Marcus knelt down and pulled her close, ignoring the water seeping from his clothes. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I had to help someone whose car broke down. I'm here now. Let's get you home." As they walked the few steps to their own small house, Emma chattered about her day at school, the math test she'd aced, the drawing she'd made of the two of them. Marcus listened with half his attention while the other half calculated. He had 2 eggs, half a loaf of bread, and some peanut butter. It would have to be enough for dinner. Tomorrow he'd cash his paycheck and buy groceries. After Emma was fed, bathed, and tucked into bed with her rabbit, Marcus sat at the kitchen table and stared at the bills. Rent was due in 5 days. The electric company had sent a final notice. Emma needed new shoes. Her toes were pressing against the front of her current pair. He'd used the part that was meant for the Morrison job, which meant he'd have to buy another one, cutting into his already thin profit margin. For a moment, just a moment, he wondered if he'd made a mistake stopping to help. Then he thought of Eleanor's frightened face in the rain and knew he'd do it again in a heartbeat. Some things mattered more than money. His father had taught him that. Sarah had lived it every day of their marriage, volunteering at the homeless shelter, even when they could barely pay their own bills. Marcus pulled out the business card Eleanor had given him, mostly out of curiosity. It was too wet to read, the ink bleeding into an illegible blur. He tossed it in the trash and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it another 14-hour day. He checked on Emma one last time before heading to his own room. She was sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of childhood dreams. Whatever struggles he faced, whatever sacrifices he had to make, she was worth every single one. He kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "I love you, baby girl." That night, Marcus fell asleep within seconds, too exhausted to dream, too tired to wonder if anything would ever get easier. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, preparing the world for what was to come. The next day passed in its usual blur of physical labor and quiet desperation. Marcus worked through lunch to make up for the lost time the previous evening, his body running on coffee and determination. When he finally pulled into his driveway that night, right at 6:30 as promised, Emma was waiting at the window. Her face lit up when she saw him, and that made every aching muscle worth it. They were halfway through dinner, boxed macaroni and cheese with cut-up hot dogs that Emma had declared delicious, when someone knocked on the door. It was an unusual sound. They rarely had visitors, especially unannounced ones. Marcus wiped his hands on a dish towel and opened the door, expecting maybe Mrs. Patterson or a lost delivery driver. Instead, he found Eleanor Hartwick standing on his porch. But she looked different than she had in the rain. Her silver hair was styled perfectly. She wore an expensive-looking navy suit, and behind her stood a tall man in his 30s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and holding a leather briefcase. A black town car idled at the curb. "Marcus," Eleanor said warmly, though he could see emotion flickering in her eyes. "I hope I'm not intruding. May I come in?" "Of course," Marcus stammered, suddenly very aware of his cramped living room with its second-hand furniture and Emma's toys scattered across the floor. "Please come in. Can I get you something to drink?" "No, thank you." Eleanor stepped inside and the man followed. "Marcus, this is my son, David Hartwick. David, this is the remarkable young man I told you about." David extended his hand, his grip firm and assessing. "Mr. Chen, it's a pleasure to meet you. My mother hasn't stopped talking about you since last night." Emma appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy, who are they?" "It's okay, sweetheart. These are some friends. Go finish your dinner, okay?" But Eleanor had already noticed her. Her entire expression softened as she looked at the little girl. "And who is this beautiful young lady?" "I'm Emma," his daughter said with the unself-conscious confidence of a 7-year-old. "I'm having macaroni and cheese. It's my favorite." "Mine too," Eleanor said with a smile that seemed to light up the dingy room. After Emma reluctantly returned to the kitchen, Eleanor turned back to Marcus. Her eyes swept over the worn furniture, the stack of bills on the coffee table, the water stain on the ceiling that he couldn't afford to fix. Understanding and something like pain crossed her features. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," she began. "Last night, when you stopped to help me, I wasn't just some random stranger in trouble. I was driving back from a very important meeting, one that could have changed the trajectory of a business deal worth millions of dollars. When my car broke down, I thought the evening was ruined. I thought I'd missed my deadline, that I'd failed to deliver critical documents that needed to be signed by midnight." She paused, pulling a handkerchief from her purse to dab at her eyes. "But more than that, I was afraid. I'm a 73-year-old woman who suddenly found herself alone on a dark street in a storm. I called my son, but he was 2 hours away. I called for a tow truck, and they couldn't help. Car after car passed me by like I was invisible. I started to think about all the terrible things that could happen, and I was genuinely frightened." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just glad you're okay, ma'am. Please let me finish," Eleanor said gently. "Because of you, because you stopped when you had every reason not to, I made it to that meeting. I delivered those documents with 10 minutes to spare. But more importantly, you reminded me that kindness still exists in this world. You gave me something I thought I'd lost." David stepped forward, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. "Mr. Chen, did you know who my mother is?" Marcus shook his head, feeling increasingly confused. "My mother is Eleanor Hartwick, the founder and CEO of Hartwick Industries. We manufacture automotive parts for most of the major car companies in America. Our company is worth approximately $2 billion. The number hung in the air, absurd and impossible. Marcus looked from David to Eleanor and back again. "I don't understand." Eleanor reached out and touched his arm. "After you helped me last night, I tried to call you. The business card I gave you had my personal number, but it was too damaged to read. So I did something I haven't done in years. I hired a private investigator to find you based on your name and the location where we met. What they discovered broke my heart." She pulled out a folder from her handbag and handed it to Marcus. Inside were documents, records of his life laid bare, his wife's medical bills and funeral expenses, his mortgage statements showing he was 3 months behind, the judgments against him from creditors, his daughter's school records, his employment history showing the 60 and 70-hour weeks he'd been working for 2 years straight. "This is private," Marcus said quietly, anger and humiliation burning in his chest. "You had no right." "You're absolutely correct," Eleanor agreed, her voice steady. "I violated your privacy, and for that I apologize. But I needed to understand who you really are. And, Marcus, what I found was extraordinary. You're a man who lost everything, who has every reason to be bitter and angry at the world. Yet you stopped to help a complete stranger when you had $17 to your name and couldn't afford to be late getting home to your daughter." She took a breath, and Marcus could see tears streaming down her cheeks now. "My husband died 15 years ago. We built Hartwick Industries together from nothing, working side by side for 40 years. When I lost him, I thought I'd lost my faith in people too. I see so much greed, so much selfishness in my world. People pretend to care, but they're really just counting my money, waiting for me to die so they can fight over the inheritance." "Mom," David said softly, but she waved him off. "It's true and you know it, David. Half your cousins haven't spoken to me in years except when they need something. But you, Marcus, you didn't know who I was. You had nothing to gain. You were exhausted and broke and late, and still you stopped. You got soaked to the bone fixing my car, and you wouldn't take a penny for it." Marcus felt his own eyes burning. "Mrs. Hartwick, I appreciate you coming here, but I don't need charity. I'm managing fine." "This isn't charity," David interjected, opening his briefcase. "My mother and I have a business proposition for you. We'd like to offer you a position with Hartwick Industries." Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Sir, I'm a mechanic with a high school diploma. I think there's been some mistake." "There's no mistake," Eleanor said firmly. "Marcus, we have 17 automotive service centers across the state. We need someone to oversee their operations, someone who understands cars, but more importantly, understands people. Someone with integrity and character. The position comes with a salary of $120,000 a year, full benefits, company car, and a performance bonus structure." The number was so astronomical that Marcus had to sit down. His knees simply gave out. $120,000. He currently made $38,000 working twice the hours. "There's more," David continued, pulling out documents. "We're prepared to pay off your mortgage immediately. Consider it a signing bonus. We'll also establish a trust fund for Emma's education. Full ride to any college she chooses, graduate school included." "Why?" Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" Eleanor knelt down in front of him, taking his grease-stained hands in her manicured ones. "Because 30 years ago, when my husband and I were struggling to keep our first shop open, a man helped us. We'd broken down on the highway, and a stranger stopped and fixed our car for free. We tried to pay him, but he refused. He said, 'Just pass it on someday.' We never saw him again, never got his name, but I've always remembered him." She squeezed Marcus's hands. "For 30 years, I've been looking for a way to honor that man's kindness. I've donated to charities, funded scholarships, built community centers, but it never felt quite right because I was giving from my wealth, not from my need. You gave from your need, Marcus. You had nothing and you gave anyway. That's the purest form of kindness there is." "I have a daughter," Marcus said, looking toward the kitchen where Emma was surely listening to every word. "She's my whole world. I can't uproot her. We have a regional office right here in town," David assured him. "You wouldn't have to move unless you wanted to. The position is based here, though you'd travel to inspect other facilities a few days each month." Marcus looked at the papers, at the numbers that represented a completely different life. A life where he could afford Emma's shoes without checking his bank account first, where he could take her to the doctor without calculating whether he could skip his own medication, where he could tuck her in at bedtime instead of arriving home after she was asleep. But he thought about the other mechanics at the shop, guys who'd covered for him when Emma was sick, who'd shared their lunch when they knew he'd skipped buying one. He thought about Mr. Morrison, who'd given him extra jobs even when business was slow. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "It's too much. I need time." Eleanor stood smoothing her skirt. "Of course, take all the time you need." But Marcus, I want you to know something. This isn't about me saving you. You saved yourself 2 years ago when you decided to keep going for your daughter. You saved yourself every morning you woke up and chose to work and fight and love despite your grief and exhaustion. I'm just opening a door. You're the one who has to walk through it. She handed him another card, this one laminated and protected. My personal number. Call me when you're ready, but know this, whether you take the job or not, I'm paying off your mortgage. That's not negotiable. Consider it payment for saving an old woman's life, because that's what you did, Marcus. I was in real danger, and you put yourself at risk to help me. After they left, Marcus stood in his living room holding documents that represented more money than he'd ever imagined having. Emma crept out from the kitchen and wrapped her arms around his waist. Daddy, are we going to be okay now? Marcus picked her up, holding her tight even though she was getting too big for it, and let himself cry for the first time since Sarah's funeral. Yeah, baby girl, he whispered into her hair. Yeah, I think we're going to be okay. 3 days later, Marcus accepted the position. But first, he called Mr. Morrison and arranged to help him hire and train his replacement. He called each of the guys at the shop and made sure they knew it wasn't about them, that they'd become like brothers to him. And he called Mrs. Patterson and set up a trust fund for her too, because she'd been there when he had nothing to give. 6 months after that night in the rain, Marcus stood in a Hartwick Industries conference room, presenting a plan to improve working conditions and pay for mechanics across all their service centers. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her eyes shining with pride. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, she pulled him aside. Marcus, do you know what the best part of all this is? What's that, Mrs. Hartwick? Eleanor, please. The best part is that you haven't changed. You still arrive early and stay late. You still learn everyone's name and ask about their families. You still stop to help when someone's in trouble. Success didn't corrupt you because you already knew who you were. That evening, Marcus picked Emma up from school in his new company car, but they drove to their old neighborhood first. He'd kept his promise to Mr. Morrison, checking in weekly and sending new customers his way. They pulled up to their old house, which Marcus had decided to keep and rent to a young family at below market rates. The father reminded him of himself 2 years ago, tired, determined, and desperately trying to provide. Why do we still come here, Daddy? Emma asked. Marcus looked at the small house where he'd learned to survive. To hope, to keep going when everything seemed impossible. Because this place taught us something important, Emma. It taught us that who we are isn't about what we have. It's about what we do when we have nothing at all. Because you helped that lady in the rain, Emma said solemnly. Because we help people when they need it, Marcus corrected gently. Whether we have $17 or $17 million, that's what matters. That's what your mom would want. They drove to the cemetery then, something they did every Sunday. Marcus placed fresh flowers on Sarah's grave and told her about their week, about the good they were doing, about the scholarship program he and Eleanor were launching for children who'd lost a parent, about how Emma had made the honor roll and was taking piano lessons. I think I finally understand something, Sarah, he said softly, Emma's small hand in his. That night in the rain, I thought I was helping Eleanor, but really we were helping each other. She needed to remember that kindness exists. I needed to remember that I was still the man you fell in love with, even without you here. We were both lost, and somehow we found each other. As they walked back to the car, Emma looked up at him with Sarah's eyes. Daddy, if we saw someone broken down in the rain now, would you still stop? Marcus didn't hesitate. Every single time, baby girl. Every single time. And he meant it, because the measure of a person isn't what they do when they have everything to give. It's what they do when they have nothing at all and give anyway. That's the miracle. That's the message that matters. That a single act of kindness, given freely with no expectation of return, can create ripples that change not just one life, but many. The best investment we can ever make isn't in stocks or real estate or businesses. It's in each other. It's in stopping when we're tired, giving when we're broke, caring when we're overwhelmed, because you never know when the stranger you help in the rain might turn out to be the angel who saves your life in return. Or more accurately, when helping someone else might be exactly what saves you.